The opening verse of the portion of Beshalach begins with the words, Vayihi Beshalach Paroi Esa'am. It happened when Pharaoh sent out the people. V'loinacham Elikim Derech Eretz Pelishtim, and God did not lead them through the path or the land of the Philistines. Kikarevu, even though it was near, Kiyamar Elikim, because God said, Pen Yinachim Ha'am Bereisam Milchama B'Shavu Mitzrayma, perhaps the people will reconsider when they see a war, and they will want to return to the land of Egypt. This is the opening verse of the Parasha of Beshalach, which continues with the famous story of the splitting of the Red Sea and the song of the Red Sea that is recited every day in our daily prayers. And this concludes really the Exodus of Egypt, because even though the Jews leave in the previous portion in Boy, they were still concerned that the Egyptians will still chase after them. But after the splitting of the Red Sea, the entire army of the Egyptians were gone, decimated, and now they fell for the first time true freedom from the land of Egypt. Let us look into the first verse and understand it on 5 levels. The first verse begins, Vayihi Beshalach Paroi Esa'am. It was when Pharaoh, it happened when Pharaoh sent out the people. He sent them out against their will, because there were many Jews that still wanted to stay behind in Egypt. And it goes on to say, however, God did not lead them through the path or the land of the Pelishtim. What is the meaning Nocham? Says Rashi, the first Rashi in the Parsha of Beshalach, says Rashi on the words Vayihi Beshalach Paroi, it was when Pharaoh sent out the Jewish people, the Goymer, etc. V'loi Nocham, and he did not lead. Says Rashi, V'loi Nogam. What does it mean, Nocham? Nogam. Nocham means Nogam, to lead. Now, what is Rashi saying here? What is he adding here? What is he telling us we didn't know before? So, some of the commentaries, like the Sifsei Chachamim and others, say that the word Nocham can mean to regret or to reconsider. And therefore, Rashi says, don't read V'loi Nocham, that he did not reconsider, but rather V'loi Nocham, to lead, that God led them. In other words, he did not lead them through the land of the Philistines, but he led them throughout the desert for 40 years. That is the meaning of Nocham. The Rebbe gives another interpretation. He says Nocham means that if you read the verse, the first part says, Vayihi Beshalach Paroi, Paroi sent them out. So what does it add by saying V'loinacham Elikim? What does the second part of the verse add? In other words, we have a rule in the pasuk. Whenever we continue with other synonyms, the additional synonym is really coming to add to the previous synonym. So if we say that Pharaoh sent them out, and now God led them, what was the addition to the leading over the sending out? Now, of course, you can obviously answer, one was Pharaoh, one was God. But besides that, the word Nacham also has an additional meaning. And therefore says Rashi Nahagam. In other words, Pharaoh sent them out in a chaotic way. He just threw them out. Get out of here, you guys. Leave. Please take whatever you want. Just get out of here. You guys are dangerous. You're bad news. We don't want you here. After Pharaoh sends them out in a chaotic way, God now, Nocham, which means, says Rashi, Nogam, means God brings them into an orderly fashion. He organizes all of the tribes in a very methodologically and with algorithms, puts them all together so that they can now travel in the desert properly for the next 40 years. This is Pshat, simple interpretation. What is Remez? What is the hint? The hint is that we have a rule in the Torah that from the negative, we could derive the positive. And from the positive, we could derive the negative. So if it says God did not lead them through the land of the Philistines because perhaps there would be a war and they would return to Egypt, means to tell us that it would have happened. That if he would have led him that way, they would have probably gone back to Egypt. So he doesn't lead them that way, so they don't want to return to Egypt. So in other words, we can derive the positive from the negative. By not going this way, he brought them another way, which would be good for them. And they would want to go this way. In other words, this is a lesson, a hira, a remez, a hint for us, for all generations, every day of our life. And that is if God takes us through a certain path and not the other path. We say, how come God didn't give me that path? Why is God giving me this path? I would like to go on that path. You know why he didn't send you that path? That path is not for you. He knows better. If you would go on that path, at the end, you'd want to turn back and not go on that path. So he's sending you on a different path, and this is the right path for you. I had a grandfather, Rabbi Hecht. He was a chassid of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And in the late 1800s, the Lubavitcher Rebbe said to him, for kind America, go to America and become a Gabi Tzedakah and raise money for the Jews and the rabbis in Europe and Poland and Russia. And throughout the years, many of the rabbis who came to raise money for their yeshivas used to stay in his house. And when the wife of the butcher of the sheikh heard that Heshmelech Fort Kane America is going to America, she tells her husband, now you go ask the Lubavitcher Rebbe that you also want to go. So he goes into the Rebbe and says, Ich will foreign kein America. I want to go to America. He says, why? He says, Heshmelech Fort. Heshmelech is going. And he said to him, hey, we bleiben. Do we bleiben do. Which means he's going to remain religious. And you are going to remain over here. Every person has a different path. The path that God takes us down that path, that's your path. Stop blaming other people. Stop giving excuses. Why couldn't I have that path? That path is not good for you. This is the right path for you. And the same is true with our generation. Our generation was now endowed with a mission to complete the purpose of creation. Yes, we left Egypt over 3,300 years ago, but now is the time to have the ultimate geula, the ultimate redemption. And the Rebbe is telling us that the mission is of our generation. We have to prepare ourselves and prepare the entire world, the Kabul Pnei Mashiach Tzidkenu, to receive the countenance of our Mashiach. And we're saying, it's not for us. Give it to somebody else. It's not for me. I can't do that work. I'll light candles. I'll go to the shul. I'll give a lot of money to the synagogue, but I don't want to get involved with, bringing the redemption. No. This is the path of our generation. And if it was given to our generation, it means we can do it. And in particular, to teach the 7 Noachide laws to the nations of the world. We are the ambassadors of God. We are the chosen people of God. On Sinai, God gave us the Torah, but he also instructed us on Sinai to teach these Noachide laws to the entire world, to prepare not only the Jewish people, but to prepare the entire world. The Kabel Pnei Mashiach Tzidkenu, to receive the countenance of our Mashiach. My uncle, Rabbi Abraham Hecht, who was a big rabbi in the Sephardic community, when he was a Bocher in 770, in the 1940s, the previous Rebbe sent him to go to Worcester, Massachusetts, and start a yeshiva there. And he was a young American boy. He took a nice shower, looked spiffy, got dressed very handsome, knocks on the door to canvass a neighborhood to get the parents to send their children to the yeshiva. And it was a Sunday morning. In America, Sunday morning, you don't get up so early. And he knocks on the door, and the lady comes to the door and says, we don't give money here on tzedakah Sundays. No collectors here Sunday. And she locks the door in his face. And he gets all embarrassed. I'm not a fundraiser. I'm coming here to start a yeshiva. Don't compare me with the schnorrers who are collecting money. And he went back to the Rebbe. The Frierdiker Rebbe says, this is not for me. I can't do this job. I can't bring kids into yeshiva. I was embarrassed. And the Rebbe Rayatz, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, who's passing us today, Yud Shvat, said to him, a misplaced embarrassment, embarrassment that is unfounded, is a sign of arrogance. In other words, there's no reason to be embarrassed. You're doing the right thing. It's like, oh, I can't put on tefillin because I'm afraid someone's going to look at me and I'm going to be embarrassed. The first law in the code of Jewish law is not to be intimidated from your neighbors. So there are things that you should be embarrassed about, like walking in the street without clothing. There's something you have to be embarrassed about. But to walk in the street with a towel and tefillin and looking like a frum yid, there's no reason to be embarrassed. And that's what the Rebbe says to him. Misplaced embarrassment, because you're doing the right thing, is a sign of arrogance. And this is the message of the Remez, the hint of the Torah. God did not lead them down that path because that was not their path. But from the negative, we derive the positive. But you're on a path now, this is the path you should be. Drush, homiletics. Rashi tells us, the very first Rashi, God did not lead them down that path. What does it mean, Nacham? Says Rashi, Nagam. Now, why does Rashi have to tell us Nacham is Nagam? Let the Torah say Nagam. Would have been easier. Because Nacham could be ambiguous. Say Nagam. It's a clear word. You know what it means. The answer is whenever you have two interpretations to one word, they're both correct. In other words, the Torah is telling us two things here. Number one, God led the Jewish people into the desert for 40 years. But number two, it was Nacham. The word Nacham comes from, etymologically, the word menucha, which means tranquility and rest. That this path that God chose for the Jewish people, that he led them through, was a path of tranquility. In other words, when you normally travel, there are challenges. It's dangerous. It's tiring. It's a schlep. But here, Nacham, God made sure that the path was smooth and comfortable and beautiful and amazing. That's why the Torah uses the word Nacham over Nagam, to tell us, in addition to the fact that God led us in a very orderly, organized fashion, he also made sure that this would be a great journey, a journey that brought us tremendous pleasure and tranquility. This also answers another question. You know how Rashi is very medaic, he's meticulous in his wording. Every word is very perfect and exact. Not only the actual commentary, but even the words that he brings down from the verse. Those words and not other words are also important. Now, if you look in the very first Rashi, it says, Vayhi Beshalach pare. It was, and it happened when Pharaoh sent out the people. Now, Rashi does not comment on these words. He only comments on the future words, V'loi Nacham, and God did not lead. Why does Rashi also bring in the first words, Vayhi Beshalach pare? You should have began the Rashi by saying, why does the meaning V'loi Nacham means V'loi Nagam? From here, Rashi is telling us and answering another question. We have a general question here. We say God did not want to lead the people on this path of the Philistines, even though it was closer. And they would have got to Israel in 11 days, 11 journeys. Why? He was afraid they may encounter a war and want to return. Return to where? To Egypt, to bondage, to slavery. Really? Does that make sense? We know throughout history, there are many revolutionists that gave up their life and they're willing to fight the war, even though they're going to die, to change the future of history. In other words, anything is better than going back. We'll fight a war and die in a war, but at least it's free people. Why would we think they're going to go back to Egypt and go back to slavery? And everybody suffered there. The men suffered. They had tremendous back-breaking labor. Women suffered. It says, the Gemara says that they gave men women's jobs and women men's jobs. They changed roles to make it uncomfortable. And children were put into the walls of the pyramids and the buildings if the parents had not fulfilled their quota. So why would they want to go back to Egypt? And that's why Rashi hints this by saying, "Vayihi Beshalach Paro." Pharaoh had to throw them out of Egypt. In other words, it doesn't make sense. It's illogical. But perhaps it's about the fear of the unknown. People are always afraid. I know you promised me a better future, a better tomorrow, but I'm okay with my tsaris, my problems today. So here Rashi, by adding these words, tells us that for some reason they did not want to go. And we know in truth that 4/5 died in the plague of darkness because they did not want to leave Egypt. And they did not believe in the redemption. So, God did not allow them to go down this path that would cause the rest of them to also return back to Egypt. But even those people who may have returned, God still made sure he gave them a beautiful, tranquil journey. That when they traveled together with God, they went in style. They went in with the best chartered buses and the best people and the best tour guides to make sure it'd be a very beautiful experience. Okay, what is the Soit? What is the Esoteric? Let's use some Kabbalistic words over here. We know it's brought down in Kabbalah that the Jewish people in Egypt were in the 49th level of impurity. They sunk spiritually down to the lowest levels of impurity, 49 levels of impurity. In other words, they followed and engaged in the ways of the Egyptians. And the Rambam tells us that the Egyptians' ways were very depraved, most promiscuous of all the lands of the world. And they served idols like the Egyptians, and they lived a very immoral lifestyle like the Egyptians. So they fell into 49 levels of impurity. If they would have been there one more night, one more day, they would have been gone forever. If they would have fell into the 50th level, they would have been gone forever, which is one of the reasons why we find between Passover and Shavuos, we count 49 days to receive the Torah, to pull ourselves out of those 49 levels. Now, listen to this. According to Kabbalah, when Pharaoh sent them out of Egypt, so they shouldn't fall into the 50th level, they couldn't go into the land of the Plishtim. Why? Plishtim, according to Kabbalah, represents Mavui Mufulash, which means an opened alleyway where you can do what you want, where you have arrogance and you have self-esteem and you have the ability to feel, what you want to do. This is what I want. The I is very prevalent in Plishtim. It's about arrogance. So if the Jewish people would have left Egypt and gone into this new Egypt, into this new challenge of Plishtim, which is the challenge of arrogance, they would have gone back to their levels of Egypt, their levels of impurity. And that's why they had to go into the desert, no man's land, representing the idea of bittul, self-nullification. There's nothing there. I'm a nothing. Nothing can grow. When you reach that level of rock bottom, ground zero, when you feel you're totally bankrupt, that's when you become the vessel to receive the infinity of God. The moment you think you're something, you have talent, you have knowledge, all of your talent and all of your knowledge is limited compared to God's infinity. The moment you open yourself up for God, saying, God, I'm nothing. I know whatever I have is zero compared to your infinity. I'm like a desert, I'm desolate. Then you are opened for greatness. Then you open yourself up for God's blessings. Okay, what does Chassidus say here? Very interesting. the Jewish people leave the land of Egypt. And God says, I'm not going to bring them through the land of the Philistines. Even though from Egypt to Israel was 11 journeys. It would have taken them basically about 11 days. And yet, God chose to bring him through the land of the Philistines. The Medrash says like this, that 11 days after Sinai. The word Achad Asar, 11 days, says the Medrash, alludes to these 11 journeys, but also another Medrash says these 11 days allude to Achad Asar, one of the 10. In other words, 11 is 10 plus 1. Achad, the one, the unique of the 10, implying that from the 10 commandments that they received on Mount Chorev, because Sinai had many names, one of them is Chorev, the greatest of the 10 commandments, the Echad Asar, the one of the 10 is Anochi Hashem Lekecha. The greatest of the 10 commandments is the commandment of I am God your Lord. And this is the concept of Antu Chad V'loi B'chushban, alluding to God's level of God, you are one and only, but beyond number. I can't count you as 1 and 2. You're beyond number because you're infinite. So this level of Anochi is something that God wanted the Jewish people to experience and wanted the Jewish people to internalize. And therefore, if he would have taken them directly from Sinai to Israel in 11 journeys, they never would have internalized this level of godliness. It would have been from above. It would have been overwhelming. The concept of belief, yes, I know it exists, but how do I live with that? How can I internalize that in my daily life? But because they went into the desert for 40 years, they were able to internalize Anochi, this level of God, and make this their daily routine, make this their daily life, and internalize this in everything that they do. As we know, the number 40, number 1 alludes to the idea of Ben Arboim Labina. When you reach 40, you have understanding. What does understanding mean? It's not that I'm just doing it because I have to, or someone is telling me to do it, but I understand it. It's logical. I'm internalizing the idea, and now I want to do it. The same idea says that a student does not understand his teachings, the teachings of his Rebbe, of his rabbi, until 40 years. You cannot really understand the depth of your master's teachings until 40 years. Similarly, Moses was on the mountain 40 days, 40 nights. Why? Because when he was on the mountain, God taught him the whole Torah. And now he shares that Torah over the next 40 years. So one day in heaven is like 1 year down here. So 40 was all about internalizing these energies, these powers, these levels of godliness, which is beyond time and space, to make this and hone these powers in our very core. And this is also the opening verse of the parasha. Beshalach Paroi. Paroi, on one hand, we know to be a villain, wicked, tyrant, etc., etc. But in Kabbalah, it's explained that there is a level of Paroi on a supernal level. Paroi represents a level of holiness and godliness beyond our comprehension. And it says that you had to give 1/5 of your land to Pharaoh. Again, Kabbalah says 1/5 alludes to the idea of the 5th. Pharaoh is the 5th level. There are 4 levels or 4 letters to God's name, the Yud and the He and the Vav and the He. Paroi represents a level to unleash. The word Paroi means to unleash and to reveal and unveil the deepest levels of spirituality. So Vayhi Beshalach Paroi Yisrael. Pharaoh wanted to give this level of Pharaoh to the people. And therefore, in order for them to internalize this level of Pharaoh, this level of godliness unleashed, he couldn't send them 11 journeys through Pelishtim to Israel. He had to make sure that for 40 years they would internalize this in their psyche, in their emotion, in their lifestyle, that this should permeate and internalize their very core of their existence. And in truth, what we're saying is we're taking now 11, the number 11, which is the 11th level, a level beyond time and space, and bringing this down into our daily life. I would like to remark that today we celebrate Yud Shvat, which is the passing of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yisrael, in the year 1950. And then the following year, on the 11th day of the 11th month of the 11th year of the previous Rebbe coming to America, our Rebbe took over leadership of Chabad. And the Rebbe is connected with the number 11. He was born on the 11th of Nisan. And number 2, he became Rebbe on the 11th day of the 11th month of the 11th year. And he was Rebbe for 40 years. What was the entire raison d'être, the entire mission of the Rebbe? Simply to bring God to every Jew. That was his mission. And not only it should be something because you have to and because God demands it of us, but it should be with tremendous joy and Ahavas Yisrael and love for another Jew. So this is the celebration of this day, that we are once again reminded of our mission. We are once again inspired to fulfill this mission. And once again, today is the day that we are empowered, each one of us in this generation, to continue down this path that God has set for us, and to use our talents, our knowledge, and our abilities to enhance ourselves, enhance the people around us, and to prepare ourselves in the entire world to Kabbalah Pnei Mashiach's kingdom.